So before we begin today, let's kind of talk about where we were and where we're going. So we just finished Philippians, and that was a 14-week journey through that book. So we did 4 chapters in 14 weeks through Philippians, and as we established, Philippians is one of the most important letters in the book, in the whole New Testament, and probably the whole Bible, because it is kind of our field manual on joy. So we're starting Ruth today, and Ruth is going to feel different. Ruth is going to feel different than Philippians. Number one, I'm not going to have as many opportunities to yell at you as I did in Philippians. So Ruth is going to feel different, and that is intentional. You know, I wanted to have kind of a break from that New Testament epistle where it's very doctrinal. It teaches, deep doctrine and deep church theology and whatnot, ecclesiology. I wanted to break from that and go to something a little different. So we're going to what's called Old Testament narrative. So for the next 2 Sundays, we're going to cram 4 chapters into 2 Sundays. We did 4 chapters in 14 weeks. Now we're going to do 4 chapters in 2 weeks. For the next 2 Sundays, we're going to do what we didn't do in Philippians. We are going to read a story. This is a story. This isn't a letter. There's not a theological argument happening. We're not going to find any truths about how we should be running our church. This is just a story, okay? And that is a very important distinction, because the way you read a story is fundamentally different than the way you read a letter. So a letter is going to state an argument. The New Testament letters, there's always an argument that is being made. A story shows you something. A letter instructs, and a story draws you in and makes you feel something. And then, if the story is doing its job and you're paying attention, the story teaches you something that you could not have arrived at by argument. Okay, so when you look at the Bible, the whole of the Bible, over half of the Bible is narrative. Genesis, Exodus, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, both the Kings, both the Samuels, Chronicles, all of the Chronicles, the Gospels, Acts, all of that is narrative. It's all story. And most of us read those stories wrong. Okay? We read it looking for facts. We read these and we analyze them looking for facts. We read it looking for information, We read it as if these biblical stories, we read them as if they're a historical textbook. Now, we begin asking what happened and where it happened and this, and we miss entirely what the author is trying to do to us. So over these next 2 weeks, I'm going to model something. I want to show you how to read biblical narrative the way it was designed to be read. So we're not just going to be going through the book of Ruth as digging into Ruth and finding the truth there. We're also going through the book of Ruth because it is the perfect book to use when you're learning or teaching how to read biblical narrative. So this isn't just an expository sermon series on the book of Ruth. This is kind of biblical hermeneutics or biblical interpretation 101, okay, or even 100. So don't view this as a lecture. View this more as a journey through the book together. We're going to read Ruth as a story. We're going to follow the plot. We're going to pay attention to the characters. And I want you to notice what the narrator lingers on and what he rushes past. Because there's going to be certain things that he hangs out for a little while, and then there's going to be things that he mentions and he's on to the next thing. Okay? And if we do all of that well, you'll leave these next 2 Sundays hopefully not just knowing the book of Ruth, but knowing something about how to read every other narrative in your Bible. Hopefully it leaves you with a tool in your toolbox and helps you to understand the rest of the Bible better. So let's start by kind of painting the picture of where the book of Ruth takes place. I want you to open your Bibles to the book of Judges. Okay? Specifically, Judges chapter 21, verse 25. Okay? Now, we're not necessarily going to read it. I'm going to say it in passing, but I just want you to sit with it. I just want you to sit with that verse 25. Chapter 21, verse 25. Sit with that. Because the book of Ruth begins with one sentence that locates it in time. The first sentence of the book of Ruth is, "In the days when the judges judged." And if you know something about the days of the judges, those 6 words can make your stomach drop. The book of Judges is absolutely one of the most disturbing books in the Bible. If you haven't read it, it is extremely unsettling. It's the story of Israel in free fall, essentially. The pattern repeats itself with nauseating regularity. Israel rebels against the Lord hands them over to an oppressor. Israel cries out. The Lord raises up a deliverer. Israel is rescued. And then, almost immediately, Israel rebels again. So this cycle of rebellion, oppressor, savior, delivered, rescued, rebellion, this cycle repeats itself for 21 chapters in the book of Judges. Over and over and over and over. And the book of Judges ends with 2 horrifying stories. And I'm not going to say what they're about because there's little ears in the room. That's how bad they are. There's a lot of... Let me say this. There are very few things that I won't say from the pulpit. I won't, not with kids in the room. We won't talk about Judges 19 and 20. Okay? So these 2 chapters at the end of Judges are horrible. And the narrator's verdict on the whole catastrophe is a single sentence that almost sounds resigned. Judges 21:25. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Does that sound familiar? Everyone doing what is right in their own eyes. Think about that. So as we relate the book of Ruth and the book of Judges to our lives today, this is your application. This is something to ponder about. How can we take these biblical lessons and apply them to our own lives? So that's the world we are stepping into, and that's the world that Ruth opens. Moral and spiritual anarchy. Complete and utter chaos. The covenant people of God living in comprehensive contradiction to everything God called them to be. They're living in the opposite way. God called them to be holy and set apart, and they're living like pagan heathens. The darkness is total in the book of Judges. And into that darkness, this small, often overlooked, quiet story about 3 women on a road. That's where we are. 3 women on a road. There are no kings. There are no battles. There are no prophets calling down fire. Just a famine, a family, a series of deaths, and a road between Moab and Bethlehem, walked by widows with nothing left. The author of Ruth, who we don't know who authored Ruth, the Jewish Talmud states that Samuel authored Ruth. However, I don't believe that to be true because Samuel died before David took the throne. And the book of Ruth at the end mentions David by name. So it wouldn't make sense if Samuel wrote it. I believe it to be Solomon. That's just a side note. So the author places this story in the days of Judges for a reason. Because the grace of God is most visible against the darkest possible backdrop. When you go to a jeweler and you ask to see a fine diamond, does he take that fine diamond and put it on a nice clean white pillow and say, look how beautiful this diamond is? Or does he lay down a black cloth, place the diamond on it, and shine a light on it? Okay, so keep that imagery in mind when you think about the grace of God during this dark time. The hesed of the Lord. Hesed is the Hebrew word for covenant faithfulness and royal love. So the hesed of the Lord shines brightest when everything around it has gone dark. Because even when his people are in moral free fall, even when the covenant community has become nearly indistinguishable from the pagans, God is still working, still moving, still keeping his promises. So with that being said, please open to Ruth chapter 1. We're not going to stand and read today because we're going to read a lot of verses. So we're just going to kind of read this as a story, and I'll stop and kind of commentate as we go. So Ruth chapter 1, starting in verse 1, we see, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And we'll stop there for a second. Before the story has taken a single breath, the author has loaded the opening scene with a ton of theological content. More theological content than most preachers' sermons contain. So we're in the days of the judges. We established what that means. There is a famine in the land of Bethlehem, and a man from Bethlehem. Does anybody know what the word Bethlehem means? House of bread. So there's a famine in the land of Bethlehem, and a man from Bethlehem, the house of bread, is leaving because there's nothing to eat. So watch what the author is doing here. He doesn't tell us anything about the famine, why it came along, or how long it has lasted, or what the people of Bethlehem are doing about it. He just says there was a famine in the house of bread, and he lets that irony sit there. The house of bread had no bread. Right? So think about that. They are living in the land of promise, and the promise isn't producing. They are in the place where God said he would meet them, and the meeting has not been going well. And the man of Bethlehem, his name is Elimelech, responds by doing what? Leaving. So there's a ton of irony in here. Now, here is the first moment where we need to ask the question the author wants us to ask. What does the action tell us about the character? So the main character right now is who? Elimelech. So what does his action tell us about him? So remember, in biblical narrative, the actions of characters reveal their character. So the things the characters do reveal truths about that character. So what does Elimelech's actions tell us about him? His family has no food, so he makes a decision. But notice exactly what he is doing. He is leaving the land of promise. He is leaving the covenant community. He is leaving the context in which God promised to be present with his people. And he is going to Moab. Moab. Does anyone remember how Moab was founded? The nation of Moab came from Lot's incestuous relationship with his daughters after Sodom. So, this is the nation that hired Balaam to curse Israel, and this is the nation that God explicitly excluded from the assembly of his people. So Elimelech is leaving the land of promise for a nation that God has very clearly said, I hate them. They are disgusting to me. They are abhorrent. This is what Elimelech is doing. But let's think about this. Elimelech is not committing some obvious dramatic sin, right? He is making a practical decision under pressure. And yet, the author is showing us something. A man whose first instinct under pressure is to seek provision outside the covenant, rather than cry out to the covenant God for provision within it. So when the heat is turned up on the stove, Elimelech jumps out of the frying pan. The ESV commentary says, Elimelech does not seem to prioritize the privilege of living in close proximity to the Lord's presence among his covenant people. When the bread runs out, he looks outside rather than up. Now, let's not be too hard on Elimelech, because we are Elimelech, right? When our circumstances get difficult, when the famine hits, when the provision runs out, when the church isn't affirming our preferred nuances, what do we do when the house has no bread? Our first instinct is usually the same. Look for another field, right? So the narrator doesn't give a commentary. Every once in a while in biblical narrative, you'll see it in the book of Matthew. Matthew gives a lot of commentary. You know, Jesus will do something and Matthew will say, this happened to fulfill this prophecy. That's commentary. This narrator doesn't give any commentary about Elimelech or what he's doing or anything. He simply states what he's doing, and then he moves on, right? So he moves on, and it says, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died. So we have all of this stuff saying this passage where there's a famine, and Elimelech has his family, and he moves them out of the country to Moab, and then he dies. Elimelech dies, and Naomi, she was left with her two sons. So Elimelech was the main character. He dies. Now who's the main character? Naomi. You got to watch for things like this. This is a shift here. So she's left with her two sons. These two sons, they took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other, Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion, those are her two sons, died. So that the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. So you have these two, we got about 5 verses here. And within those 5 verses, we have about 10 years of time passed. Elimelech dies, Chilion dies, Mahlon dies, Naomi's left destitute. So think about what you just read there. Okay, think about that. Her husband dies, the sons marry 2 Moabite women. They didn't even marry Jews, they married Moabite women. 10 years pass in a single sentence there. And then the sons die. And the narrator is moving very, very fast, and the speed is intentional. We barely have time to absorb one loss before the next one arrives, right? 10 years compressed into a clause. Mahlon gone, Chilion gone, and Naomi, who has not yet said a single word in the story, by the way, is left. She's the only one left. Without her husband, without her sons, without any man in the entire family, in a foreign country, she's still in Moab, among foreign people with 2 foreign daughters-in-law and no future she can see. Beloved, that's what empty looks like. We're not talking metaphorically empty, like I've had a hard week at work and I'm drained. This is stripped down to nothing. Every human source of security, provision, identity, and future has left Naomi. Okay? So, you have to remember the culture in which Naomi lives. She lives in a culture where a woman's standing depended entirely on the men in her family. Entirely. So, how much standing does Naomi have? None. None. She has no standing. She has no claim. She has no next chapter. She is a foreign widow in Moab with nowhere to go. So the author has brought us to the story's floor. This is the floor of the story in 5 verses. We get 5 verses into the story, and here we are at the bottom. And he has done it so quickly, so relentlessly. We feel it, right? When we're reading this, we're like, da 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 da, in the land of the judges, da da da, and everyone died, the end. Right? It's like a whirlwind. That is the genius of biblical narrative. Okay? We are not reading about grief right now. We are experiencing grief at the pace at which it actually comes. So, who is the central character of the story right now in the book of Ruth? It is Naomi. Okay? Just because the book is named after somebody does not mean they are the main character. Think about that. Naomi is what you call a dynamic character. A dynamic character is one in a narrative that changes. You have flat characters that stay the same. You have dynamic characters that change. Okay? Naomi is a dynamic character. She is the one the author wants us to watch do something. The author wants us to look at Naomi and watch her do something. And we have just watched her go from full to empty. Okay? So, moving on. Verse 6, Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So, that's one sentence, and all of a sudden everything shifts, right? So we had this horrible emptying over a 10-year period, and now one sentence and everything's shifting. Notice what moves Naomi. It wasn't a prophecy. It wasn't anything like that. It was simply a rumor that traveled across the border from Judah to Moab. That's it. The Lord has visited his people and given them bread. The house of bread has bread again. Okay? And Naomi, who has been stripped of everything, with nothing left to hold her in Moab, turns her face toward where? Home. She's got nothing left, so she goes home. The word return is going to appear over and over in chapter 1. The Hebrew word for return means to turn back, to turn back. And that word appears 11 times in chapter 1 alone. What do we say about repetition? Repetition is the hallmark of Hebrew literature. When the author repeats something, he's saying, look at this. I want you to see something here. So he's repeating this word, return, 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 11 times. The author is hammering on something here. What is he hammering down on? A theological theme. Return, turn back, come home. This is the language of repentance in the Old Testament. This word for return, this is the same word the prophets use when they call Israel to turn back to the Lord. The same word. So Naomi's physical journey home is the author's way of showing us something about what it looks like when a broken, emptied, grieving person turns back toward the God she cannot yet fully trust. She does not turn back because she has processed her grief and arrived at a place of peace. She turns back because the bread is there and she's starving. And that's enough. You know, the Lord does not require that we have our act together before we come home. Do you know that? He just requires that we come home. That's it. That's a sermon all in itself. So the scene that follows this moment of her deciding to go back home, the scene that follows, it's very important. There's 3 women, Orpah, Ruth, and Naomi, right? A road and a conversation that reveals a lot about each one of them. So, Naomi speaks first. Naomi speaks first. This is the first speaking line we've had from Naomi. Okay? And we're, nearly 10 verses in. This is the first time she speaks. And she says, go, return each of you to her mother's house. So she releases them. She looks at Ruth, looks at Orpah, and she says, go. Go back to your families. She blesses them. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt kindly, or as you have dealt with the dead and me. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you've dealt with me. Okay? She kisses them. She sends them home. Well, the daughters say, no, we'll go with you. They say, no, we're going to go with you. And then Naomi says something that tells us exactly where she is theologically. She says, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? And at the end, she says, the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. So that's where Naomi is theologically. The hand of the Lord has gone out against me. So she's not hiding her theology behind a polite religious language, right? She's not saying, well, God is sovereign and he controls all things and he means good for the people who love him and this. No, she says, God did this. God did this to me. He's gone out against me. God is the one who emptied me. And she loves these women enough to tell them the truth. That following her means following a woman whom God has marked for suffering. If you follow me, you will suffer. So this isn't unbelief, by the way. She's not saying there is no God. This is lament. This is lament. Remember a few weeks ago, we were in the book of Lamentations and we talked about biblical lamenting. So Naomi still knows who God is, but she has interpreted her suffering as evidence of divine disfavor, as evidence that God is not pleased with her. She believes the Lord is against her. And in her pain, she is trying to protect these two young women from the consequences of staying near someone God seems to be punishing. Both daughters-in-law weep. Both say they will return with her. And then the story slows down. See, there's a few reasons why biblical narrative authors use words, quotations, speech. There's a few reasons why they use speech. One of the reasons to use speech is to take a narrative time frame that has been moving really, 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 really fast and slow it down. You know, some of the other reasons are to reveal things about characters and whatnot. But in this instance, the author slows the time down by using speech. Remember, because we were moving across this large time frame of 10 years, and then no one had spoken yet. And then Naomi speaks, and now all of a sudden you have this interpersonal moment where time has slowed down. So you go from 10 years to one day. Naomi presses them again and says, return to your people. Return to your gods. The argument she makes is heartbreaking. She has no more sons to give them as husbands. She's too old to remarry, she says. And even if she conceived that day and bore sons, they'd have to wait years. She cannot provide for them. She has nothing to offer, and she knows it. And what does the text say? Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. That means she left. It means she left. In the old ancient times, and even in the East now today, a kiss is a common greeting and goodbye. So when it says she kissed her mother-in-law, it means Orpah left. Now, let's pause on Orpah. I don't want you to be too hard on Orpah, right? Again, just like Elimelech, she makes a reasonable choice. The pragmatic choice. She is a young Moabite widow with her whole life ahead of her. We don't know how old she is, but people used to get married a lot younger in the ancient East than they do nowadays. So she's very young. Her husband is dead. She has her whole life ahead of her. She should go home to her people. She should go find a husband and build a life. Because what Naomi is offering is nothing. Nothing. Can offer her nothing. What Moab is offering Orpah is very reasonable, and so Orpah chooses reasonably. Okay? And then the story slows down even more. So that was a time frame that passed very quickly. You know, Orpah kisses her, Orpah leaves, and the story slows down. Look at the words I have highlighted there. But Ruth clung to her. One verse. One verb. Clung. This is the same Hebrew word used in Genesis 2 when a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife. This is what we call covenant language. Okay, Ruth is not just refusing to leave. This isn't the author telling you that Ruth gave her a big hug. This is Ruth binding herself to Naomi. And then she speaks. And this is the moment the narrator has been building toward the whole time. This is the big moment in chapter 1. The pace of the entire chapter has been rapid. Tragedy after tragedy, verse after verse. Barely a breath between losses. Speech in biblical narrative, like I said, is used sometimes to slow down narrative pace. Right? So she speaks. And she says, do not urge me to leave you. This is Ruth speaking. Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. So, side note, this could be a totally different sermon, but do you think there's a little bit of a biblical structure here for how foreigners should act when they immigrate to another country? Your people will be my people, your God, my God. That's just a side note. But I want you to feel the weight of what Ruth has said here. Okay? This is a Moabite woman. She is from a place that was founded with incestuous roots. From a people excluded from the assembly of God, and from a nation with zero covenant relationship with the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Okay? Ruth is making a covenant declaration. Your people, my people, your God, my God. So this isn't a romantic devotion between friends. Okay? This is a theological confession. Ruth is transferring her allegiance from the gods of Moab to the God of Israel. She is crossing the covenant boundary in the middle of a road with nothing to show for it and no rational reason to do so. This is not the rational decision. Okay? She's lived with Naomi in Naomi's house for around 10 years now. She has seen how this woman relates to her God, even in suffering, even in grief, even in the bitterness of loss. And something in what she has seen has convinced her that this God is worth crossing a border for. Or at least Naomi is. The author's point is being made quietly but unmistakably. The covenant faithfulness of God, mediated through the imperfect, grieving, theologically confused Naomi, is compelling enough to draw a pagan woman into the covenant. What does that tell you about how God works? You see, God can work through you whether you are theologically, doctrinally, religiously perfect or not. You don't have to have perfect theology, perfect doctrine, perfect knowledge of the Bible for God to work through you and reach others. God can work through me. He can work through you. Naomi does not even know what she is doing right now, how she's affecting Ruth. All that matters is she is. All that matters is she is. And when Naomi sees that Ruth has set herself to go, she stopped speaking to her. The speech stops. There's nothing left to say. The decision has been made. The covenant is spoken. Two widows turn their faces toward Bethlehem. And we see starting in verse 19, it says, "So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said," these are the women of Bethlehem, they said, "Is this Naomi? Is this Naomi?" So after the famine and the deaths and the decade in Moab and the road and the conversation and Ruth's covenant declaration, they walk through the gates of Bethlehem. And the women say, "Is this Naomi?" It's not a simple greeting. It's not what they're doing. There's a bit of shock here. Like, is this really her? The woman who left us years ago with a husband and sons, full? This is the same person? This raggedy, poor, grieved widow? She looks like someone who's been empty. Naomi confirms it. She says, don't call me Naomi. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why wouldn't they call her Naomi? Why would they call her Mara? So this is the theological center of the entire first half of the book, chapters 1 and chapter 2. This is the pinnacle. Everything the narrator has been building toward has been a preparation for this moment. Naomi stands in the gates of Bethlehem and makes her accusation out loud. So she's not just saying it to her daughters-in-laws now, she's saying it to the general public. She says, don't call me Naomi. Naomi means pleasantness. It means my delight. She says, call me Mara. Mara means bitter. Because that is what I am. And that is what God has made me. Bitter. Notice now, we've got some names now, right? Notice what the narrator's doing with the names. Naomi means pleasantness. Mara means bitter. Bethlehem means house of bread. Elimelech means my God is king. So, can you spot the irony in the names? Elimelech, my God is king, leaves the covenant land for Moab. The house of bread has no bread, right? The names in this story are we said the narrator isn't adding any commentary. Well, the names are the commentary. That's the commentary. It's embedded in the vocabulary of the narrative itself. There's no external narrative. He writes it into the story. When Naomi renames herself Mara, it's not an expression of emotion. It's a theological statement about the nature of her experience of God. She's testifying, she's telling these people of how God has dealt with her and has made her bitter. God has dealt with her bitterly. Okay? I went out as Naomi, as the woman whose name said that life with God is good, and I'm coming back as Mara, bitter. Bitter. Because the evidence of my life contradicts the name I was given. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Those words are in yellow on the screen. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. The title of this sermon in Naomi's own words: full, empty. Who did it? Who brought her back empty? Who caused her emptiness? The Lord. The Lord has brought me back empty. So I want to linger here because this is a spot where most people who have preached this passage or this book, they kind of rush past this moment in their eagerness to get to Boaz and the happy ending. But the author doesn't rush past this, nor should he. He stops the story here at the gate of Bethlehem with Naomi's accusation kind of hanging in the air and lets it breathe for a moment, because this is a theological problem and it deserves a real theological hearing. Naomi is not wrong about the facts. She has her facts straight, right? God is sovereign. The famine happened under his watch. Elimelech died under his watch. Mahlon and Chilion died under his watch. The emptying was real and total, and it happened in a world governed by the Lord of Israel. These are facts. So she is not inventing divine sovereignty to explain her suffering. She is applying it correctly to what she has experienced. God is sovereign, and this all happened under his watch. Where she is wrong in her conclusion, the Lord has testified against me. Okay? That's where she gets it wrong. The Lord has testified against me. The Lord has brought calamity upon me because he is against me. She has allowed her circumstances to interpret God rather than allowing God's word to interpret her circumstances. She is reading her suffering as divine condemnation when it's actually, as the rest of the story will show, the precondition of divine restoration. God is not against Naomi. He is working for her in a field she has not yet seen. Through a daughter-in-law she almost sent home toward a redemption she cannot yet imagine. But here's what I want you to notice. Here's the thing. The author doesn't correct her. Right? He doesn't correct her. He doesn't say, Naomi doesn't say, the Lord has testified against me, and then the author say, however. No. He just lets her say it. He doesn't correct her here. He lets her say it. He lets it stand. He records it in the text with the same weight he's given to everything else in the story. Because this is what suffering looks like from the inside, right? This is what it sounds like when a woman who has lost everything tries to make sense of her life, at least the theology of her life. This is what lament looks like. Not the sanitized, quickly resolved, everything happens for a reason version we prefer. This is real, raw lament. The kind that stands in the public gate and says out loud, look how empty I am, God did it. I went out full, he brought me back empty. Call me bitter. The Psalms are full of this voice, by the way. Job is full of this voice. Jeremiah wrote a whole book in this voice. And the author of Ruth is telling us that this voice, the voice of suffering-induced theological confusion, the voice of the believer who cannot yet see what God is doing, it's legitimate. It's a legitimate voice. It belongs in the story. God is not offended by your accusation. He's got broad shoulders. He can take it. And then, almost as an afterthought, tucked at the end of the chapter like a single candle lit in a dark room, the narrator adds one last interesting detail. He says, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. That is so important. It's just one little sentence tacked on to the end of this big paragraph. It's so important. That's it. So this quiet little note about the agricultural calendar, right? But us, the educated reader, who has been paying attention to details, we feel that. We notice that. What does that mean? The house of bread has bread again. Okay, the famine's over. The harvest has begun. Naomi arrives in Bethlehem calling herself bitter, and the barley's coming in. She cannot see it yet, but the author sees it, and he wants us to see it. Because this small detail is the first crack of light in a very dark chapter. It is the author's signal that the answer to Naomi's complaint is already in motion. She just doesn't know it yet. She cannot see it yet. but it's there. So this is how providence works. This is how providence works. Providence doesn't announce itself with trumpets or dramatic reversals that are immediately visible to everyone involved. It announces itself with a quiet agricultural detail. The barley's growing. The harvest is beginning. God is moving. And Naomi is home, empty, bitter, grieving, confused, accusing, but she's home. Now, let's go to chapter 2 now. Chapter 2 begins, Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. That's kind of a random little fact that the narrator throws in there, isn't it? What does that have to do with anything? Just going to randomly talk about a dead dude's cousin, I guess. So he opens with an introduction, and the way he introduces Boaz is worth pausing before Ruth has even left the house. A worthy man. A worthy man. So the Hebrew here is ambiguous, but it's deliberately ambiguous. This can mean mighty man of wealth, mighty man of valor, mighty man of virtue. It can mean any of those. All of those are legitimate translations. I'm guessing that all three are probably intended here. He's just a worthy man. He's a good dude. He's that kind of guy that you know. You know, he's just a good dude. Nothing sneaky, shady, dark, dirty about him. So the ambiguity here, it's what we call a rhetorical device. The author is withholding the full picture. He's letting the reader kind of wonder about these things, about who Boaz will turn out to be. He's saying he's a worthy man. But what do you mean by worthy? Worthy of what? Well, why don't you ponder on that a little bit as you're reading, and we'll see if we can fill in the gaps. The answer, beloved, will come later. But at this point, all we know is that someone in Bethlehem is connected to Elimelech's family, who is described in the most honorable terms available in the Hebrew vocabulary. File that away. It's there for a reason. Now, Ruth goes out. And Ruth the Moabite, notice how the author is still referring to her, Ruth the Moabite, said to Naomi, Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, and after him in whose sight I may find favor. All right. Ruth asks permission. She goes to Naomi, the grieving, bitter, confused woman who almost sent her home, and she asks, Can I go out? Naomi says, Go. Here's something the narrative assumes that you know already, and we need to pause to understand. So, gleaning. Gleaning was a provision in the Mosaic law. Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy 24. Gleaning, this law required farmers to leave the edges of their fields unharvested and to leave behind any grain that would fall during harvest. So anything that fell on the ground and the edges of their field, they had to leave. This is so that the poor, the widows, the foreigners, the orphans, and just the sojourner, the traveler, could come behind the reapers and gather what remained. It was a legal provision to help those who could not provide for themselves. Think about that. Think about that. The next time you're at the grocery store behind a line with a mom with 5 kids hanging off of her with a cart full of Doritos and then pays with her EBT card. Think about that. So, Ruth goes out to exercise this legal right. She is a foreign widow with nothing. She is exactly the person the gleaning law was designed for. Foreign, widow, poor. She goes to find favor in someone's sight. What does that mean? Finding favor in someone's sight, she simply wants someone to let her glean from their field. That's all that means. Some people get that wrong and they think it means she's looking for a husband. I want to find favor in his sight. No, she just wants to find someone who will let her pick the grain off the ground in their field. That's it. She knows it's not guaranteed. Not every field owner will treat a Moabite with dignity. She goes out with humility and hopes that someone will let her. And that's all she has, hope. And then the author delivers one of the great lines of the book. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. This is a fun sentence. Not in English, but in Hebrew, it's actually kind of funny. A more literal rendering would be, her chance chanced upon the portion of the field of Boaz. Her chance chanced. It's as if it were a coincidence. So, and the author is kind of going, hey, this is she just so happened to end up in the field that belonged to her dead husband's dad's relative. Just by chance. Well, we, the educated readers, no, of course it's not by chance. The author is making a theological point through the very grammar of the sentence. What looks like an accident is actually what? Providence. This is providence. What looks like random chance is the sovereign hand of God directing a Moabite widow's feet into the right field at the right moment on the right morning. There is no coincidence in the economy of God, beloved. There is no coincidence. There is only the appearance of coincidence to people who cannot see what God is doing. Now, Boaz arrives. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. When you see the word behold, it's not just an exclamation passing oh, and there he was. No, the author is saying, pay attention. This is important. Just like repetition can be hey, I'm trying to hint at something that you might want to notice. This is the Hebrew word henna. And henna means, look at this. Something important is about to happen. So, what happens is completely unexpected given what we know about the days of the judges. Given what we already know about the days of the judges, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. Boaz greets his workers with a blessing. He walks up to him, he says, the Lord be with you. And they answer him. And they say, the Lord bless you. Say the Salam Aleikum. Alaikum Assalam. Not everyone in Israel has abandoned the covenant. That's what the author's saying. He's saying there are righteous people left in Israel. Not everyone is doing what's right in their own eyes. Just by that simple greeting, we already know something about Boaz. Remember, speech can reveal character. In this small corner of Bethlehem, in this tiny field, among these workers, the Hesed, the covenant of God, is still operating. The covenant community still has a pulse. Boaz notices Ruth immediately. He asks his foreman about her. The foreman describes her, the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from Moab, who asked permission to glean, who has been working since morning without stopping. And Boaz does not need to hear more. He says, stop. I got it. Next, Boaz is going to do something that I believe is the theological heart of chapter 2. We talked about what chapter 1 was. This is chapter 2. Watch this. Watch this. Listen. He could have simply allowed her to keep gleaning and said, okay, cool. Let her do what she's doing. That's what the law required. He could have just said, cool, the law says we let her keep gleaning, so let her keep gleaning. He could have just said nothing, done nothing but the minimum legal obligation. He would have fulfilled his duty as a landowner. He could have went to bed at night feeling just fine. That would have been compliance. That would have been the floor. That would have been the lowest expectation. Righteous people are not content to do the floor. Boaz is not content with the floor. He goes to Ruth directly and he says, listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. He tells her she's welcome in his field. He tells his young men, don't touch her. He tells her she can drink from the water his workers have drawn when she's thirsty. He feeds her at mealtime bread and roasted grain, and he gives her more than she can eat. So he gives her an abundance. And then he instructs his workers privately to deliberately pull grain out of the bundles and leave it on the ground for her. So, Boaz is not just merely compliant to the Mosaic law. He's not content with compliance. This is genuine generosity. He is treating Ruth not as a pagan outsider exercising a legal right, but as someone who belongs here. He's treating her as a covenant insider. She has no claim to the covenant, but Boaz is treating her as one. Ruth falls on her face before him and asks the question the author wants us to be asking. Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? Why? Why do you favor me? She's a Moabite. She has no claim. She has no standing. She is exactly the kind of person that the days of the judges have produced an abundance of. The vulnerable, the foreign, the landless, the poor, the widow. There's a lot of those in Judges. And the days of the judges have also produced an abundance of people who walk past them without a second glance. Boaz is not those people. You see, in theology, there's something called a type. A type. And what a type is a small example or a small clue or small thing that points to a bigger thing or a fulfillment of the thing. So, the best example of this is the biggest thing is Christ. And in the Old Testament, we have many, 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 many types of Christ. Think about it. Abraham was a type of Christ. He was a small Christ that pointed to a big Christ. Okay? Joseph was a small Christ that pointed to the fulfillment of Christ. Moses, Job, David, and to another extent, Elijah, Ezekiel, Isaiah. These were small Christs that pointed to the fulfillment of Christ. Boaz is a type of Christ. He is a small Christ that points to the fulfillment of Christ. Boaz's answer to Ruth's question is one of the most beautiful speeches in the book. He's heard everything he needs to hear. He knows what she did for Naomi. He knows what she left, that she left her father and her mother and her native land and came to a people who she didn't know, and he blesses her in the name of the Lord, under whose wings she has sought refuge. Stop on that image. Under whose wings? Under whose wings? The Lord's. It is the image of a bird sheltering her young, brings them in, gathers them. It's protective. It's intimate. It's completely covering. Ruth has left the gods of Moab and taken refuge under the wings of the God of Israel. And Boaz, without knowing it, without planning it, is at this moment one of the wings. The ESV commentary makes a good point here. Listen to this. Boaz's conduct is shaped entirely by what he knows about God. Boaz's conduct is shaped entirely by what he knows about God. Not what he knows about Ruth or Naomi. What he knows about God. He is generous because he understands that everything he has originated in God's unmerited favor and is therefore to be used for God's glory. Everything he has been given to him by God's undeserved favor of him, and therefore everything he has should be used for God's glory. Talk about an application. He who is Boaz. Boaz is not a mercy minimalist seeking to reduce God's law to bare minimum requirements. We see that a lot in the Bible of people who will see the law and say, well, it doesn't technically say this, so if I just stay on this side of that line, I'm not technically breaking the law. Boaz is a man who has grasped the enormity of God's generosity to him. And it has made him generous in return. Now, I know this is a long sermon. I just need you to bear with me for a little bit longer. The extent to which any of us has truly grasped what God has done for us in Christ will be demonstrated in the extent to which we show or fail to show glad and humble generosity to the vulnerable people in our path. If you have truly grasped what Christ has done for you, you will take that and you will allow it to be the amount of generosity you show to those who you come across. God was generous to you, be generous to those who need it. So Ruth returns to Naomi that evening with an ephah. An ephah is about 6 gallons. An ephah of barley. That's a lot of barley. 6 gallons. That is far more than a gleaner could normally expect. Usually, you'd have your little pouch and you'd try and fill it up as much as possible. And not only the barley, but she returns with the food that Boaz had given her for lunch. That abundance. So she comes back with these 6 gallons of barley and all of these leftovers. And when Naomi sees it, she asks the question that's been building all chapter. She says, "Where did you glean today, and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." I was a couple behind, sorry. Where did you glean today and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. And what's Ruth say? His name is Boaz. His name's Boaz. And at that moment, Naomi went. Watch what happens to her. Just watch what happens to her. The woman who stood at the gate and said, God has made me miserable. Call me bitter. The woman who said the Lord had testified against her. Now what's she do? What's she do next? What's she do? Blessed be he of the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Blessed be the Lord. And then, the word that changes everything. The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. So this is a goal. Goel. Goel in the English. It's a transliteration. What that word means is a kinsman redeemer. So a kinsman redeemer is a man, in the Mosaic law, a man who has a family connection and a legal right to step in and restore what has been lost. So if your brother loses his field because he can't pay his debts, it's your legal right as the kinsman redeemer to step in, pay off his debts, and get his field back. You are a redeemer. If your brother dies and leaves behind his wife, as the kinsman redeemer, it is your job to step in, marry the wife, take on your brother's name, so that your brother's wife doesn't become destitute and her children don't become orphans. This is the idea behind the kinsman redeemer. This is God's mercy on the widows, mercy on the poor. That he has set up provisions in his law to make sure that when you're struggling, you don't lose more than you already have. So a kinsman redeemer's job is to redeem land, to perpetuate the name of the dead, and to restore Naomi's future. Something shifts in Naomi in this moment. It's small, it's subtle, it's very fragile, and it's very barely visible, but it is there. The woman who said God was against her is now blessing God for his kindness. She cannot yet see the whole picture. She cannot yet see where this is going, but the dead hope is beginning to stir. What was dead? That hope in her was dead, and now there's a little spark of life there. The first thin thread of restoration has appeared in the wreckage of her emptied life. She still looks bitter. She still looks like Mara. But the barley's in the house. There's a redeemer in the field. And God, the God she cursed and accused of testifying against her, has been moving the whole time. So, as the band comes up to play us one final song, no? All right. No song. You're good. We began this morning in the darkest season of Israel's history. There is moral and spiritual anarchy. Everyone is doing what was right in their own eyes. The covenant community was in free fall, and now we have this sweet, small story about a woman named Naomi who went out full and came home empty. So we followed her through the deaths and the road and the covenant and the admission at the gate that she's bitter and God testified against her. And we watched how, almost without her knowing it, as the first thin thread of restoration began to appear in the wreckage of her life, a field, a generous man, 6 gallons of barley, and a redeemer. So Naomi doesn't know what God's doing. She can't see what God's doing, but still she's bitter still in her own mind, and she's still convinced that the Lord testified against her. She's still reading her circumstances as evidence of divine disfavor, but we can see it, right? The educated reader can see it. The author has shown us providence is working in the fields. She cannot see through the daughter-in-law she tried to send home, a foreigner. It's all working toward the redemption she cannot yet imagine. Her chance chanced upon Boaz's field. There's no such thing as chance in God's economy. So this is the first great lesson of Ruth. There's not a theological argument. It's just a story. And the story shows us what the argument could only tell us. That God is working in the famine and in the grief and in the bitterness and in the empty hands and in the aching bones of a woman who has run out of everything. He is not against her. He has never been against her. He was in the field the whole time, pulling grain out of the bundles and leaving it in her path. Don't let your circumstances interpret God. Let God interpret your circumstances. Naomi went out full. The Lord brought her back empty. The Lord is not finished. One last word before we close in prayer. So you may have noticed your handout is a little different this week. It's not just an outline of the sermon. There are questions on here. This is a study guide, not a sermon outline. Take this home. Do your studies. Remember the sermon. I'll have it posted hopefully by Tuesday this week. You can listen to it again if you want on YouTube or Facebook. Go through your study guide. This will be very edifying for you. I'll do it again next week too. Chapters 3 and chapter 4 next week. Don't miss it. Let's pray.